Means that they've had about 30 years to tweak this stuff wherever.
And I know that this stuff exists because my father's role in the military brought him very close to it many times. So my father did 3 tours in the Vietnam War. And in his second tour, he was advanced enough in rank, and he was there, I think, 11 or 12 months. And when he was in country at that point, he's always been a field officer and came up in the military through the Korean War and a battlefield commission. And so, the military likes guys like him, and they let him be in charge of a couple of different projects. One of the projects that he was in charge of at the time was this technology that they introduced into Vietnam that almost brought the war to a standstill. Wow. And this technology was a night vision goggle. But it's not night vision as we have it now, okay? Because the night vision goggle was done in the red spectrum. And so when my father came back from Vietnam...
You mean infrared or...?
No, I'll explain.
Ordinary red.
No, ordinary red, okay. So instead of seeing... When you look at a night vision goggles now, you see green. Everything is translated into green for you. And human eye sees green, more colors, shades of green than any other color. It's part of our evolution, our need to find food.
So that's clever then?
Correct. But see, here's the thing. It started off as red. And so the night vision goggles were introduced to helicopter pilots and gunnery people in Vietnam. And I won't hesitate as to I won't guess as to which year it was that they introduced them, but my father was part of this initial experiment with the troops that he commanded. And it was a disaster because the image was presented in red pixels, not green. And because of the technology being used at that time, it created very interesting effects that they could not deal with. So you had some officers that were part of this cadre, or this cohort of other officers that were all testing these new technologies for the military that had their troops always use these goggles. And those units became self-destructive. They went down in a horrid situation. My father was extremely practical, didn't want to see himself get destroyed in any way, wanted to return and get out. So as soon as he saw what was going on with these goggles, he had his people take them off. And he actually got praise from the military for the way that he dealt with all of this. But the effect was this. A gunner in a helicopter would have no problem using these goggles. And only everything is showing up as a sort of a faint reddish image. And it was true night vision the way we have it now. And even a greater depth, because you could also flip it and get an extra layer that was sort of yellowish that would be heat signatures as well. And they don't have those combined anymore in these goggles. Anyway, the goggles that were presented to the gunners, and my father tells the story of the very first time they're out with them, and they're flying along, and he's in the front of the helicopter with the pilot. And all of a sudden, in a very peaceful area, not anything going on at all, the gunner in his on the starboard side of his helicopter starts firing wildly at their height, not at anything on the ground, but at an area that he was shooting at, and basically causing other helicopters in their little flotilla to have to react. And my father goes on back to the gunner, basically demanding, "What the hell, dude? What are you shooting at?" And the kid is just sweating profusely, and his eyes are just dilated beyond belief. And my dad thought he was dealing with another heroin addict, but this was before it had gotten really bad in Vietnam, and the kid was not exhibiting those kind of symptoms. He was reacting to what he had seen. And he's describing to my father that he was shooting at these basically flying demons that were flying alongside the helicopter. And he knew they were coming to get him because they were gesturing at him and they could see him. And so he reacted, and he started shooting his Bren gun, big 50 caliber slugs at these things, right? And they were flying along right next to the helicopter, so he's firing out directly from the helicopter, and there are other helicopters in the vicinity, so it caused all kinds of problems. And this goes on repeatedly, week after week after week. Every time they try and use these night vision goggles, at some point they encounter monsters, true monsters. Now, officers had been told not to wear these. Okay, the pilots were told not to wear them. And his eyes are just dilated beyond belief. And my dad thought he was dealing with another heroin addict, but this was before it had gotten really bad in Vietnam, and the kid was not exhibiting those kind of symptoms. He was reacting to what he had seen. And he's describing to my father that he was shooting at these basically flying demons that were flying alongside the helicopter. And he knew they were coming to get him because they were gesturing at him and they could see him. And so he reacted, and he started shooting his Bren gun, big 50 caliber slugs at these things, right? And they were flying along right next to the helicopter, so he's firing out directly from the helicopter, and there are other helicopters in the vicinity, so it caused all kinds of problems. And this goes on repeatedly, week after week after week. Every time they try and use these these night vision goggles, at some point they encounter monsters, true monsters. Now, officers had been told not to wear these. Okay, the pilots were told not to wear them. But my dad put them on to see what the hell was going on, and to hear him describe it,
Wow.
it was like being in the worst kind of a demonic gothic hell.
Jeez.
That you'd look out at the tops of trees and you'd see these creatures with big wings and claws and everything come flying off of the tops of the trees. But you take the goggles off and there's not even a disturbance in the fog above the canopy of the trees, right?
They're perceiving into an aspect of consciousness.
Correct.
Another dimension.
And it was tied to the red image. As soon as they went to green, all of this kind of stuff disappeared.
Of course. And we don't have time.
Yeah, I know.
Me studying Pythagoreanism and vibrations, we could speak a lot about this, but let's not even go there. But one question: are these connected to the modern night vision goggles people used to see UFOs?
Correct.
Third generation or whatever they're called. Is it the same technology?
It's the same technology. It's just that the translation is done through a different phase alignment, and we're not seeing everything that the goggles could show you.
And they don't connect it to heat signatures either, right?
They don't do that, and then they also don't do it with a red display. Now, the red aspect of it is interesting because the green display comes from electrons, not photons, okay? And it comes from an electron transmission. Presumably, they were still doing electron transmission. They were just turning it into a red
Kilner
filter.
worked as a medical electrician at St. Thomas Hospital, London from 1879 to 1893. As you could probably guess from the term medical electrician, he specialized in electrotherapy. He was an MD, BA, and an MB. Kilner attended Cambridge University in England, and by 1833 he was a member of the Royal College of Physicians. His writings covered a wide variety of topics, but the one we're focusing on today is his book, The Human Atmosphere. This book suggests that there is an aura or colorful fringe or outline on each human, and that the color of that fringe can help indicate the mood or wellness of the subject. In the book, Kilner describes how to make the aura visible to anyone, even the untrained neophyte. He does this by placing dicyanin dye between two panes of glass and hermetically sealing it. So let's just pause here for a second and think about the term hermetically sealed. I'm sure by now all of us have heard of the Greek figure Hermes Trismegistus, but what does that have to do with sealing? Let's take a quick look at Otto von Guericke, a man well known by mainstream history as a scientist and politician. His work largely focused on atmospheric pressure, electrostatics, and of course vacuums. It was his invention of the Magdeburg hemispheres that seemed to have popularized the term hermetically sealed. As to why he chose to use the word hermetically, the reason seems to be that it was said in mythology that Hermes has the ability to seal a box or chest in a way that would prevent it from ever opening again, much like the strength of a vacuum seal that von Guericke was well known for. Modern science unsurprisingly scorns this type of research and preaches that it is pseudoscience. But there is no way to test this for oneself, as mysteriously, the dye in which this experiment uses is very difficult to get hold of. In the experiments, the researchers would view the subject through the screen in the daylight with the dye sealed inside the glass.
In his book, Human Atmosphere, Walter explains how he came about finding the dye and explains in detail the different portions of the aura. In order to make this work, two screens were necessary, one containing a solution of spectoranine, an alcohol, and a second less dilute. Spectoranine was another term that Walter Kilner used for dicyanin. When looking at the body through the screens, first you see a dark band, not exceeding a quarter of an inch, surrounding and adjacent to the body, without any alteration in size at any part. This he calls the etheric double. The second portion is the inner aura. It is the most densest portion and follows the contours of both female and male bodies. It arises just outside of the etheric double, but it does look as if it touches the body itself. The third portion, the outer aura, commences at the outer edge of the inner aura, and it varies in its size. When the whole aura is observed through the blue dicyanin screen, all the portions seem to be blended together, but the part nearest the body is the most dense. However, if a carmine screen is employed, which is a red dye that he experimented with in order to see more details of the aura, the different portions of the aura become distinguished. He compares many different auras and describes them in detail in his book, such as the difference between a healthy and a sickly aura. This practice should belong to the field of spectroscopy, but it seems as if the field has been covered up in a way so that it's not connected with the occult any longer. Today, analytical spectroscopy is defined by the range of electromagnetic waves interacting with the material, such as ultraviolet visible, infrared, X-ray, radio, or microwave frequencies. Using these methods, modern science can obtain information about atoms, molecules, or even stars in the sky. However, it seems all attempts to connect the occult with the subject have been suppressed, such as viewing auras as screens, looking to other worlds, and seeing beings that were not visible before. This goes back to Baron von Reichenbach in the 1800s. He was a German astronomical instrument maker who claimed to see auras around the poles of magnets and around human hands. He is the one who discovered paraffin and other coal tar products in the 1830s. Between 1835 and 1860, he also published a long series of scientific papers on meteorites. His many contributions earned him a well-deserved reputation as a brilliant scientist and industrialist. His colleagues, however, wanted nothing to do with his work on a mysterious force which he named Odd. We can do a separate video on this topic. Reichenbach documented the reports as sensitive, seeing emanations from crystals and magnets in total darkness and detecting alternations of electric current. They could also perceive an aura surrounding the human body. This influenced the work of Kilner, but this technology is most likely not new and has been used in ancient times to communicate with other beings and to see into other realms. Magic mirrors, crystal balls, tinted glass windows in churches. These technologies existed in ages past, but they have now been lost in our modern time. Following the work of Kilner came Harry Boddington, in his work, The Development of Clairvoyance and the Scientific Formation of Circles. Quote, while searching for a method of transforming human radiations into terms of color, Dr. Kilner hit upon an original method of diagnosis. In its essential dicyanin, it corroborates the statements of clairvoyance and cuts short the long years of preparation at one time thought to be necessary. By utilizing a little-known dye called dicyanin, he produced an effect upon the optic nerve which extended normal vision into the regions of the infrared and ultraviolet ends of the spectrum. Radiations like the perfume of flowers in the human aura thus became visible. Following his lines of research, I made an apparatus which obviated much of the expense and all the drawbacks of Kilner's original screen. This was registered under the name of Aurospecs. Thus, Kilner opened an avenue to psychic science, although he never personally saw beyond the etheric body. The avenue is led by the most direct route to second sight and has been adopted by spiritualists as the safest and most certain method of development. Watching the aura was found to develop impressionism of a high order. Many of these impressions, being far beyond the capacity of the recipient, compel scientists to speculate upon the possibilities of a world of consciousness external to the brain of experimentalists. That the mist and the screens themselves are but a means to an end is proved by the resultant second sight becoming habitual. With steady, regular practice, the mind automatically focuses the eye just as normal sight does for near or distant views. Nearly everybody is able to see the vague, shadowy lines of forest termed aura after using Kilner's screen with correct lighting. I have publicly demonstrated that about 80% easily register the first stages of auric sight. Density and color become apparent to a few at once, but the majority merely see a gray or black shadow extending from one hand to another. Everyone regards it as an optical illusion, until they find that the lines of force can be stretched in every direction. Figures 1 and 2 explain what is seen. An optical illusion always retains the same shape and form. The aura will be found to change its shape and color in accordance with mental qualities and health or disease. The fortunate few travel onwards from this point to clairvoyance of an exceptional character.
Kilner published a medical study proposing the existence of what he called the human atmosphere, or what is more commonly known as the aura. According to Kilner, this aura could help with medical diagnosis and prognosis of possible diseases and ill health or mood. Kilner attempted to invent devices which could be used to view these auras with the naked eye. Thus he created the Kilner goggles, in which glass slides containing alcoholic solutions of various dyes were used as filters to train the eyes to perceive light outside of the normal visible spectrum. According to him, after the eyes had been trained, one could simply dispense the goggles and view the electromagnetic spectrum with the naked eye. He did not recommend merely viewing the subject through these lenses, as many online now claim. Dr. Kilner wrote a book detailing his studies of the human aura in which he claimed to be able to diagnose a number of diseases and disorders by visualizing this quote-unquote auric activity. He also details instructions on how to construct and use similar goggles to view the human aura. Curiously enough, according to the text, the original copies of the book used to come with dicyanin cells for use by the reader. Other than excerpt in the book, though, no copies or records of these cells have been found. The dyes that he recommends using are extremely scarce and sometimes toxic chemicals, dicyanin included. Although a few replacements have been historically suggested, we must first inquire about the details of this chemical and whether its effects can be replicated. Dicyanin A, the actual dye used in these goggles, is in itself toxic to humans. A few chemistry companies sell it online at around $200 per gram, which is decently expensive even for research chemicals of the type. On the material safety data sheet it is stated that the chemical may cause eye and skin, respiratory and digestive tract irritation. However, even after ignoring the issue of toxicity, there is no special property of dicyanin dye that cannot be replicated using other chemicals. After analyzing the absorption spectra of the dyes analyzed in Kilner's book, we can observe that most of them have a very similar range of absorption. So possibly there could be a manner to create these goggles without utilizing this toxic chemical, but in order to do that we must first verify whether the supposed mechanism that these goggles would be used for, which is seeing auras, is even possible and empirically provable. So let us analyze some of the claims made online and on 4chan on this subject. On one thread made in April 2018, the op says, quoting,
"These are Kilner goggles. They contain a dye called dicyanin dye in liquid lenses. This dye is a more controlled substance than even nuclear samples. The people who have a free pass for legal LSD and other chemicals for research cannot get this. It was banned in the late 1940s after Operation Paperclip for one simple reason. It is the easiest proof of the paranormal ever. It allows anyone to see other people's auras, even watch it change as a person goes through deep meditation, and see other phenomena like how electricity actually moves and works.